let's talk about your career a little bit.
Oh boy.
What was your first published work? How did you break into the industry?
My first published work was a fan drawing in ROM number 37, I think. I don't remember now what issue number it is. And I wasn't aware that it was going to be printed, so I was always embarrassed by it because it was a gag about the Hulk sending a get well card to one of the villains, Avalanche, because he broke his arms. But it's drawn really goofy and it's misspelled on purpose because it was from the Hulk. I had not asked them to print it, but apparently Al Milgram, the editor, was just like, "Hey, let's run this. Let's color it and run it." So my friend Rob calls me up and tells me, "You got a letter. You got a drawing in ROM." So then I sent them a drawing that I was hoping they'd print, and that I wish they had just written me and said, "Stop." No, but that was my first published piece of artwork in a comic, and my first. I'm trying to think. Was the first thing that I did? The first thing I did was probably Figments, Figments, which was a creator-owned book with a writer named Alan Rollins, who I met at the comic store that I worked at. And this was for Amazing Comics. And the great thing about early black and white book companies, I mean, I guess it still works that way, was how the names of a lot of these publishers were not correct for the Amazing was not amazing. Eternity did not last an eternity. Things like Continuity had no continuity. They didn't put shit out. It was pretty cool. But Amazing was the book that I got ripped off on, that me and Alan got. It sold very well for the time. It sold very well because everything sold, because they were hoping that it would be the Turtles or Worth something. Like when the preteen Jiu-Jitsu gerbils came out and the kangaroo, all that stuff. Everything was seen as a possible hot book that could be put up on the wall in the behind the counter. So it sold like 20-something thousand copies, and we never saw any royalty. I mean, yeah, that was a mess. I destroyed all the artwork from that because it was terrible. I was penciling on that, and that was my first published work, and it was terrible. It was amateurish, and I still remember my friend telling me that there was a guy involved with the process who told people at a convention in New York that I would have no future in the comic book industry. And, looking at the work, I don't know if I can blame him. I wish he didn't say it to people that I knew. It hurt, and maybe he had a thing there. Maybe I have no plans on the future with the comic book industry. But that was the first published thing. It's terrible. Then I think I did a bunch of work for Byron Price, who did comic stuff that a lot of it did not get into comic shops at the time. Sorry. He was doing like stuff with Scholastic and educational comics, as well as other kinds of things. And I did some short story adaptations, science fiction and fantasy, for the Bank Street Book of Science Fiction and the Bank Street Book of Fantasy. Also very bad because I inked myself and because I penciled it. But they were not very good. But he paid very little, but he, it was a place to get. It was a place, you could tell the places where the jobs were going to people who were entering the industry as newbies and were taking jobs that didn't pay well and that didn't need the artwork to be incredible, or veterans who were looking for work as they were aging out of the industry or whatnot. I mean, that's how I got Bill and Ted. In a lot of ways, it was not a prestigious book to get. Back then, people weren't clamoring to work on IP adaptations the way they are now because everybody's fans. I mean, they definitely would have been artists who would have been like, "Oh yeah, great! I really enjoyed Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure," but all those books that Fabian was editing were going to people who were new. Like Dan Slott was doing Ren and Stimpy, which turned out to be a hit, and everybody else was somebody who was a veteran who was getting slipped work because they were dependable and the industry liked them, or they were new and could turn the work out and didn't ask for a lot of money and that sort of thing, worked in the budget. I mean, that's what happens when you start off in general. Although the thing is, with Marvel, the budget was a lot better than you'd get for something like some of the companies who own the comics that are based on TV shows and things like that right now. The industry's really fucked for page rates by and large, which is incredible considering the amount of money being generated, but there's always a reason. There's always a reason. Not always. I was very happy with the Bill and Ted offer from Dark Horse, which used part of my script that I didn't use for another company that was offering me less money than I made working on Figments in 1986, which is amazing. But that's the world and that's comics. So yeah, those were my first couple of works. My first solo work was Pirate Corps, which became Hectic Planet years later at SLG. I had been taken on some interviews to try to sell Figments by Alan, and we met with Brian Marshall and Tony Eng, who were, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was the one that was doing the Thunder Agents at the time. They were editing and working there. When Brian started Eternity with Scott Rosenberg, who's ended up backing a whole lot of companies. Who let's not talk about Scott Rosenberg, please. But they started up Eternity, and they remembered seeing the stuff that I had, sketches and page Pirate Corps, and he called me up and asked me if I wanted to do my own book, and that's when I was like, I guess I can write comics. Everything was much looser then. Eternity, Brian left Eternity, and Eternity hired me to do Wild Nights, and then I did a Milk and Cheese page for a fanzine, for Greed, and Milk and Cheese kind of started getting me more notice. And people that I met at conventions started giving me some work. I met Bob Schreck and Diana Schutz, who ended up at Dark Horse. The way that I got into comics full time in 1991, the last part of this I'll answer, is because Fabian called me to do Bill and Ted based on Pirate Corps and meeting me at San Diego when he was in marketing at a dinner when I was still working at the comic store and Marvel people and our staff. And Diana called me up to try to get me a job on Predator because their penciler had ghosted them, stiffed them. I mean, I guess if you say ghosted back in the day, it means that they did the artwork without credit under somebody else's name. But now, they just disappeared. And they were trying. I was not the best choice for the book, but I got it done. It sold fantastically. It's the best-selling comic I'll ever work on. It was up until Marvel bought up until Disney bought 20th Century Fox and all that stuff, and Dark Horse lost the license. It was still a book I was making money on 30 years later. So that's a bummer. Hopefully, they'll work it out that Marvel will start paying people based on their contracts, but I'm not holding my breath for that when they put the Predator omnibus out next year. So that's the story of everything that I did at certain, first solo work, and first I could quit my comic book job and working at the punk rock club and bar backing and be a cartoonist. And I've been a cartoonist, writer in some shape or form, ever since. Holding on. Yeah. Oh boy, I'm tired.
When did you decide to pursue comics as a career?
Probably when I was around 12, 13, 14, I was like, I want to work at Marvel Comics. And then I stopped reading comics in high school for a while, and I'm going to be an animator. I wanted to be somebody who I wanted to animate cartoons. I was a fiend for that stuff. And the 80s was a very lean time for animation of any quality in America, in North America. You had Nelvana and you had Bakshi doing his hack jobs. At the time, I was a big fan. But yeah, Saturday morning animation did not look very good. There was not a lot of jobs. When I ended up in college, there was like, this is not a great time to be getting into animation, and we can't see it getting any better anytime soon. You're either going to be working for Bakshi. If you're brilliant, you might get a job at Disney or Bluth if he hangs on. But you might be making no money doing animation for Sesame Street, things like that, industrial films. Who knew what was going to happen in animation and television? But at the time, it was a bit of a mug's game. It was because you loved it, just like comics. But when I was in high school, in art class, a couple of friends of mine were telling me that George Perez had come over to DC and was working on Teen Titans. I was never a DC fan, but I liked George Perez, and they kept every day in art class. Mark and Tom would keep telling me about what was going on. I started getting interested. I went to Paul's Sweet Shop, which was one of the places that had comics. It was a magazine store, newspaper store, mob front, and had a soda fountain. It was a cool place, but the owner was a piece of shit. And I bought issue 2 of Tales of Teen Titans, I think it was, with Raven or something like that. And I just tumbled back into comics and got into it, and then got a job in Jim Hanley's during college and got into all kinds of comics again. I mean, I still like different kinds of comics, but I was still a superhero guy. And I rediscovered EC, Barks, Undergrounds. I was never a huge Undergrounds fan, but I got into Love and Rockets, and there was comics running in the New York, in the Village Voice that you could pick up for free going to college in the city, and the New York Press. And it was a good time to like comics and cartoons and stuff, as far as the way the punk stuff was handling it, and the zines and the free weeklies. There was a lot of cool content. Charles Burns and Linda, God, I'm blanking on her name, but Linda Barry, and Life in Hell was running, and the political cartoonists that were running, and there were comics in all sorts of magazines back still. And it was rich, and New York was was still the comic book town. And I felt head over heels in comics. And while in college, while I was animating and working on live action films, I was terrible at the technology, for one thing. And I could always handle a piece of paper and a pencil to tell a story, to create a world, to create characters. And in college, I realized that I didn't like film school all that much, except for the screenwriting classes that I took because I didn't know what to do with myself, and the history stuff and the theory at the time, all of which I've forgotten. And I started drawing comics again because I realized that I wanted to tell jokes and I wanted to write stories, but I was not a good filmmaker. I mean, I think my ideas were good. I got good grades, but I had to be, I didn't understand cameras. I was at the editing room. Well, we were working with shitty equipment too. I mean, it was like squawk boxes from fucking termite terrorists, beaten to death. I mean, you're paying a ton of money to go to college, and the equipment looks like D.W. Griffith was here on the movie Ola and shit. It was a great time, but I was also not ready for college. My social anxiety and my fear of learning and opening up to people and collaborating and showing them my work, basically. I refused to connect to the school in a way that was very helpful for me. I was actually in one class with Alex Winter, who I ended up, Bill and Ted, I'm drawing him. And a few other people ended up in comics, oddly enough. But what I liked was the autonomy of making comics and the ease of it. You didn't need a budget to draw an army or a planet or a computer blowing stuff up, or 50 punks in the mosh pit at a show, or drawing a band or anything like that. So comics once again became my medium for reasons that I was aware of, not just the love of the comics that I grew up on, but that the medium was the way that I enjoyed telling stories, telling jokes, making commentary, making fun of things, making fun of myself. But it was the language that I understood. I mean, I know I can write a screenplay. We've written stuff for TV. I mean, nobody wants me to write a screenplay, but what I really love is making comics. It's just, there's something beautiful about the personality of the cartoonist, of the artist, and the writer, if it's collaboration, of the way the words and pictures work in that contained space, with sometimes no words, abstract comics or just art comics or things like that. The way that you can really get to the heart of something like prose, but you can also get the visuals of film or television. I mean, it's a singular way of telling a story, even if it's always compared to filmmaking, you know, angle, shot. People still use that language a lot because it's better understood by more people. But you know, it's panels and gutters and pages or pixels. You know, it's a screenshot, it's monitored, but it still comes down to usually one person or one or two people, a couple of people, who can create a huge world or an intimate small world. They can be a nightclub comedian, they could be a stand-up artist. You can do everything in comics. Anything you can imagine can go on the page, and that's beautiful. It's not as supported as other media, but it's you know, it's seen as less than prose, and it's certainly not as profitable in its own form as film or television. The business is kind of like music in the way it's exploited and the way artists are forced to market themselves and sell themselves, even if they're with a fairly decent sized company. That's just the reality of comics. And the fact that there are compromises when you work on your own, and there are compromises when you are working with a company. I've had really good relationship with Dark Horse, and on the whole, I'm happy with it. But you're always going to be as useful as your sales. After a while, you know, if you flatten out a bit, you know, the people who do better than you are going to continue to do better than you, and then eventually they might flatten out a bit. So it's hard to work in traditional publishing right now, traditional comics publishing right now, because the style of my cartooning prohibits a lot of it from taking off. That has nothing to do with the audience. It just has to do with actually doing the comics that I like to do. Doing it, like I said before, doing a humor anthology like Milk and Cheese or Dork, doing short stories is how I got into the industry, how I really made my name in the industry to a lot of people. What got me my television work was Milk and Cheese. Eltingville was a pilot, but there's no place for that work. The anthologies that those strips appeared in, even the zines, I did some of those strips for zines and things like that. They don't exist anymore. That opportunity, that venue does not exist anymore. It is a financial box office poison to do something like Dark Horse Presents or Oni Double Feature, and all the Deadline USA, Deadline, all those magazines that were made up of Scatterbrain, things like that, Epic Light, they all died on the vine sometimes after 1 or 2 issues. Dark Horse Presents went on by stubbornness and a way to keep Dark Horse affiliated cartoonists and characters going when you couldn't publish full books for everything. So I got to do some Hectic Planet, and I got to do some Eltingville and some Murder Family and some Milk and Cheese and stuff like that. So that opportunity is gone for me, so I have to rethink things like that. So really all I can do for the companies right now is write. There's no way I can draw a full comic. The only things I can do for the way that I used to work in publishing is to write. And there's a million writers out there, and they're fast, and a lot of them are faster than me. And a lot of them have better bank than me right now. So I have to adjust. So it's a weird industry for me right now. For a lot of people, there's always change. But I also kind of, you got to expect it, that you're based on the way the market always was in the direct market. Your style could go out of the house, your house style, your style, your chops could fall apart. You know, sometimes, hey, maybe I suck these days. I don't think so. I don't think anybody thinks that I've fallen apart who likes my work. I think my writing's possibly gotten better and more able, but I mean, you never know. So that's my career in a nutshell, really. Stumble into things, do whatever's in front of me. Didn't have career aspirations past just doing what was in front of me. And at the age of like 50, I had to start changing my game plan. because the jobs weren't rolling in, and the anthologies and the small bits of work that I used to do for certain companies, that whole style of making comics has fallen out. That's become web comics. That's become Kickstarters. It's become anthologies that are done by groups of friends online or on a Kickstarter or by a small boutique publisher. They don't need anybody else. They've got their group, their artistic group, they're their friends, or there's no pay in it, and I can't afford to do that anymore like I used to. I took on a lot of free work back in the day. A lot of people did, and a lot of charity work, and that's just not possible sometimes. But that's how I generated a lot of work. You do legal defense fund, you get 4 pages from helping them out. You get a bunch of pages from a zine that you want to help a friend out, or you like the zine or something like that, or 2 pages for a small press book that you work literally for, trade. Somebody buys. I've got a little Nemo and Slumbar book. I could afford to do that back in the day. It's obviously something that's on my mind because it's something I'm dealing heavily with this last 2 years, especially since we started the Patreon, started doing our own stuff, which when getting back to the anxiety stuff, when you have issues with yourself and putting yourself out there, and you have some form of imposter syndrome, it's really kind of hard to go, here's my Patreon. Everybody sign up and give me like $1 to $5, $1 to $10 a month for me to keep doing, silly, goofy work, or to write about the industry, or to answer your questions, or to just be me. That's tough. That's why I didn't go to acting. That's why I didn't become an actor or a stand-up comedian, because I need something in front of me and the audience. And the Patreon is one step closer to being right out there in the open, especially when I talk about things like, mental and emotional health and the industry, page rates, things I fucked up in my career, in my life, things I think are fucked up in the industry, as well as things I like. I mean, I like a lot of things. That's why I have so much stuff in my studio and in my life. But it's tough, hey, buy some t-shirts. We have a TeePublic store. The thing is, it's worked out beyond expectations, beyond. I'm where I wanted to be in the Patreon 2 years from now. The first month that we did the first t-shirt from TeePublic, we made more money than I was expecting to make in the entire year. It's hard to maintain that, the initial push, the initial group of fans. There's a limited group of people. The commissions, I'm behind on them. I got so many more commissions than I expected, and then my hand blew out, and then a lot of other stuff happened. But I have been supported mainly by fans, and when you're in the industry, you're generally supported by fans of yourself in the industry. Editors who hate you don't hire you. Editors who don't like your work, your writing, don't hire you. They have to be a fan to some degree. And that's the thing that happens, is a lot of your fans leave the industry. I don't know anybody at DC. I don't know anybody at Marvel except someone in production who I'm friends with who's been there a while. I don't know people in the industry. I used to be really, connected through the industry being smaller and going to San Diego every year and having my work out there. I never had to plan a career because the phone was always ringing and then the emails were always coming in. Now I have to take the bull by the horns and basically suck it up, change the way I think about my work and myself, and present myself as a viable cartoonist worth following. Whether I'm doing something for the traditional direct market or just posting comics online, and and social media, which I would like to quit Twitter, because the way that I handle Twitter is sometimes the way I handle interviews. 14 tweets about the subject, 17 tweets about the subject. I'm better than I used to be, but it took up a lot of time because I would get involved with stuff and I would feel I had to push myself with social media. I like Instagram more because it's basically a dialogue with people that are a lot more attuned to what's going on, whereas I have more followers on Twitter, but a lot of them are casual, or probably don't even read my tweets, type of thing. It's very easy to follow people, but it seems like the people on Instagram actually really want to follow me. There's also a lot less drama, and it's really just a way to sell artwork and originals and drawings that I just do off the cuff and talk to people about stuff. And just my cat became a story, which was because I was feeding a cat outside and we were taking care of it. I really wanted to take it inside, and eventually the cat ran in. The cat ran in one night, and our kid was like, "Why don't we foster it?" Because we didn't think we should have another cat because we had one. And that becomes a story and part of your life. And now I do drawings of my cat, and these are pirate cat drawings because she's missing an eye. You just don't know what's going to take off or what's going to become a source of work or pleasure or income. That's what I'm learning is to. This sounds really fucking corny, but believe in myself, believe in my talent, and just keep going. Right, Kat? That sounds like an afternoon special bullshit, but it's working. I don't know if it can work forever, but I said 2 years ago I didn't think it could go a year because I don't have original art to sell that has Superman and Spider-Man on it. But the stuff that I did have that had Batman, it just sells so quickly. You can always sell your originals with those characters because there's so many fans of those characters. I can really only sell stuff to people who are a fan of Evan Dorkin, and there's only so many people who are a fan of Evan Dorkin. And then there's a subset of those who want original art or signed books, and there's a subset of those that can afford original art and signed books. So niches within niches within niches. It's scarier to work this way because you're wondering if the plug will get pulled. But I'm really busy, and I'm doing a bunch of artwork. You're not even asking questions. I'm just telling you my whole fucking life story. But as I've been interviews,
it's good because a big part of why I wanted to do this podcast is for people to talk about their experiences in the industry.
Sure. Right.
And especially the way the industry has changed in the last 30 years is something I'm interested in because I came in with the 90s boom and I kind of drifted out with the 90s bust, the late 90s bust.
Right.
But I've always loved the medium, and even though I drifted away from mainstream comics, I've always picked up things here and there. Always enjoyed reading comics, didn't really keep up with it as much. But in terms of how the industry is and how the industry has, I don't know, progressed or, self-destructed or whatever, I've only heard about those things secondhand or third hand and never from people who actually worked in the industry. Right. So I am listening and I am interested to hear your experiences. Just because it's not something a lot of people hear. I don't think the industry tends to promote a very self-serving image of itself. I think. I don't know if
sure,
but
I think that it also depends on who you're following, who you're talking to. More people are talking about the problems they've had in the industry or the problems they've created for themselves in the industry. A little less so. Not everybody. It's hard to be open about stuff. Not everybody is aware of the things that everybody says you're supposed to be aware of. I'm not on any comics chat groups. I have fewer friends in the industry than in 1991, 2000. I'm less involved with the industry. I don't know what's coming out. I don't know my own books that are collections that are coming out. I'm getting surprised by them. I don't read previews. I don't follow the industry as tight as I used to. But I follow a lot of cartoonists, many of whom have fallen out of the industry as they entered it. You were talking about talking to Shannon. I don't think he would have foreseen being in the New Yorker and doing a lot of outside comics things, because I think that we were surprised that we were doing okay in comics itself back then. Going from, he was doing mini comics, self-published stuff. And now he's a New Yorker cartoonist, that is not the normal comic book road or plan than comics were 30 years ago. It would have been unforeseeable to become a film director out of comics, to become a mogul out of comics, to become to have multiple television shows, or to have a to have Dave Pilkey's comics. I think he's the guy who does Dogman, sell 9 million copies. To have Raina Telgemeier become an industry of herself, to have manga so in demand that with problems with binders and stuff that you can't get reprints right now. There are a lot of success stories and a lot of really unforeseen paths to success, or even limited success. Like I said, I would never have thought that I'd be able to basically just become a brand, a small niche boutique brand of my own, and that's what I would be doing instead of just trying to make as many comic books that will be in previews as I can in a given year, and get as many freelance jobs to support to round that out. I don't get it, but the magazine illustration is super tight. I don't fall into any of that. I did a couple of book jobs, covers and interiors, chapter interiors. The thing is, if you get yourself out there where enough people know who you are, you will fall into some interesting work. And if you're somebody who can wear a lot of different hats, I don't know why I did this. People know what a hat is. That was fucking dumb. You will fall into even more interesting jobs. If you another thing that I told students when I used to talk at SVA is that the wider your net, the wider your dartboard, to aim at. If you're just aiming at the bullseye, which is I want to work on X-Men, or I want to write Batman, 5-6 people are going to get to do that in a year, or regularly, out of the thousands who want to do that. Now, if you want to write Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, but you also know how, I'm able to work on licensed books, I can draw, I can letter, I can color, I can do illustration work, or I can work on RPG, on role-playing games. I know how to do storyboards. And it used to be everybody had to do pay stubs and storyboards if they wanted to get side work. And pay stubs and that kind of stuff is all being done by everybody on computer and whatnot. And storyboards, there's a million people doing storyboards right now. There aren't like 5 advertising agencies and little ones in Chicago and things like that. There are so many more people fighting for the jobs that are there, and especially for the popular jobs that pay decently and have prestige in this industry, in the direct market, and to a large part, because the industry and the direct market are two different things. When we talk about comics, the average person who's doing the talking is talking about what's in a comic shop, what's a Marvel, the Marvel universe, the DC universe, Dark Horse, Image, Boom, IDW, etc., etc. They're not talking about short box. They're not talking about Iron Circus. They're not talking about web comics. They're not talking about Kickstarter comics. They're not talking about what's going on people's Patreons. They're just talking about the comics as you knew them in 30 years ago, in 91 or whatever, as I knew them back. Well, our store was pretty hip. We had newspaper strips. We had Gary Panter's, Jimbo. We had Raw. It was a full service comic shop from the get-go, the Jim Hanley's Universe, and the Fantastic Store before that. We were exposed to a ton of different work, European work, early manga with I Saw It and stuff like that, the stuff Eclipse put out, avant-garde work. We had the Village Voice and the New York and stuff like that. It was a really, really good store. We had Barks reprints, Little Lulu reprints, EC reprints, all the early strip reprints. The guy Jim Hanley, who owned it, was into all kinds of comics, and pretty much whatever was available at the time. I mean, we were getting stuff from Last Gasp, we were getting stuff from straight publishers at the time. Whatever was coming out, we were buying stuff through Ingram. It was a great store and a great experience to go up there, and opened up our customers' eyes and our employees' eyes to the full medium rather than just the direct market, as much as we loved that too. I remember getting an issue I would pick up the books from the distributor on Staten Island. Whoever had a car, we'd go pick it up ourselves, and Jim sent me out. And I remember reading Crisis. I mean, this is so you know where I'm coming from here. I talk about how much I love this, that, the other thing, and how I'm not into superhero comics anymore. I like the older stuff, and I still have, but here's the thing. Here's where I come from. I almost got in an accident because I'm reading Crisis like 5 or 6. I had a Crisis on Infinite Earths. We were so fucking into it. And I was able to read it before anybody else because I was picking it up from Comics Unlimited. I've got it open on the passenger seat of my car, and I'm doing this because I can't stop looking at it, and I almost go off the road. I mean, I'm an idiot, you know what I mean? I'm a total fucking, I got my Supergirl glass. I love the idea of superheroes. I don't jive with the way superheroes have generally been done the last 30 years at the big companies. But I mean, Hellboy's a superhero comic. Jaime Hernandez did a superhero comic. Manga, so much of that is practically superheroes in name, shape, or form. I mean, I love the idea of, superpowered goofballs doing crazy stuff. So, I mean, I like all kinds of comics. But the industry has changed, and it does still so many people, so many stores, because you don't sell to the customer in shops. You sell to the store owners first. And I've been saying this for 30 years, over 30 years. The comics industry, by and large, we have better stores now than we ever have before. We have the clerks and the managers of the stores that were better than the stores that those clerks and managers work. We've gotten better than the Jim Hanleys, who got better than the can't remember that, Bill and Bob's or whatever, the junkie shops that look like some crazy person's living room. Excuse me for saying crazy person. I know I'm deranged. I don't know. But the stores that we have now are better looking on the whole. We have better looking stores run by better, more knowledgeable staffs who are into more stuff. But there's still the minority, probably, of the stores that really, stores now, the way the industry's gotten is that DC and Marvel destroyed their mid-list. So everything has to matter. Everything has to be Crisis on Infinite Earths. Everything has to either be the biggest people in the industry are working on it, or it's all interlocked and it's Batman related and it matters. So the mid-list, the stuff that's just filling the shelves to compete with shelf space to knock each other off, that stuff used to be profitable, much more profitable. And now it's just they've destroyed their own lower tiers because that stuff doesn't matter over the years. And there are people now in stores who don't buy all the DC and Marvel titles. When I was working in comics, and when you were buying comics, when I was making comics, you would go to the average comic store, 99.9, they had every Marvel and DC title. Even if it was only 3 copies or 2 copies, we bought every Marvel and DC title. We bought most Dark Horse titles. We bought most Fantagraphics titles, which right then makes us a different store. But there's people now, the only Dark Horse they'll buy was now it's gone. They'll only buy Star Wars, they'll only buy Sin City, they'll only buy Predator and Alien, maybe a couple of other things. But, true, lines have gotten bigger and there's more people and there's more battle for shelf space. But DC, the idea that people are not buying a mid-list DC, not one copy, unless it's ordered, is so weird and so different from what it was just, 15 years ago. Maybe I'm wrong. The industry has changed so much, but we still are selling our comics primarily. The weekly, monthly comic system just does not work. People are buying collections and books, but that's what brings them into the store 4 times the regulars into stores, and the stores are where you're selling your stuff. And if most people who ran comic shops ran supermarkets, they wouldn't buy food that they were not a fan of. You'd go to somebody's supermarket and go, "Where's the coffee? I don't drink coffee." And some of them would say, "You're a jerk for drinking coffee." Who cares what you want? Go to the supermarket, but you could go to the supermarket down the block. Comic shops, you can't go to the comic shop on the other end of the town. There's so few of them now. And we're buying digital. Digital. I thought digital's supposedly doing pretty okay, but I can't talk about it because I'm not seeing any bump there. But I'm considering the fact that there's no comic book stores in a lot of areas, and you don't have to store them. I would think digital would be very, I guess a lot of people are pirating also, but digital is obviously doing better than I probably know, but you don't get good numbers on those from your publishers, and publishers don't give out good numbers, and they can tell the print stuff because it runs through certain places, and distribution just falling apart again. It's confusing as a professional who used to know all this stuff. I used to really know the retail stuff, the distribution stuff, the creator stuff, the publishing stuff. It's all up in the air for a lot of us, for most of us probably right now. The computers, the internet changed everything for good and bad. Mostly good, I think. But I think you can tell how confused I am because I don't even know where I'm going. So why don't you jump in here and direct me? Write the script that
Before we talk about your most recent work, I do want to ask you a little bit about how you moved Milk and Cheese and Dork from strips that were appearing in zines to their own dedicated books, and also how slave labor got involved with publishing them.
All right, let me try to think. Here's what I'm gonna do. Let me think for a second. I think give you a better answer than I have been. That's all right. Milk and Cheese was never designed to be a comic book. If you know nothing about me but have just heard this interview, you could tell already where the pattern is here. I never even thought of Milk and Cheese being a comic strip or a comic book. There were two little characters that I drew on a napkin, drunk after a show at CBGB's, waiting for food. My friend Brian said, "Can I have that napkin? I like them." I said, "Okay." I started drawing the characters as a joke on envelopes and things like that to publishers or to friends. And at conventions, since I didn't have established characters and I had not worked on Marvel or DC, I would just draw Milk and Cheese for whoever would come up to me with a backing board. They didn't know who I was, but San Diego seemed huge in '87 the first time that I did that show. And it was so small compared to what it became and what it is now. But everybody would go through Artist Alley and, can I have a free sketch? Sure. And I would, between my being hilarious and anxious and hungover, I would just draw Milk and Cheese and I would say, comics will rot your brain. And I would have them say rude things to the not horribly rude, but I would, I didn't know what to do. So Milk and Cheese became a kind of, insult machine, joke machine, insult gimmick, catchphrase machine. I would just draw these two dumb things, and then I would write "Burn your comics" or "Spider-Man's a jerk" or I don't know. But there's a lot of ugly marker sketches fading or thrown out of these two guys coming from the first 2 years of San Diego and other conventions. And I met at San Diego. It was much easier to meet people at San Diego. They just walk around the table. Literally, you look over and there's Poison Ivy and Lux Interior buying comics, which was fucking. I really do wish that I said hello, but I was like, what am I gonna? I'm such a fan. And you'd see, some fairly famous people, that because you could see everything, and all the industry was, like I said, smaller. So if you got invited to a party, there'd be people from the independent press, from Fantagraphics, Comico, Dark Horse, Marvel, DC. It was a totally different time, a much looser, less compartmentalized, less regulated. Now there's parties you can't get invited. Everybody has their own party. There's no one party. There used to be like this 2 parties that you went to or something like that. If you got invited, everybody would end up at those same places and talk, and that's how you got work. Whether you were meaning to or not, the people that you met went home to their places and went, oh, I have Bill and Ted, and Fabian goes, who are those? I know you did that book with bands that no one's ever heard of. That's literally what he said. I know you do that book with bands nobody's heard of, and there's a lot of music in Bill and Ted. That was one of the reasons that I got hired. Plus, the book didn't matter. They knew it was going to get canceled in 12 issues. I was only going to do 4, but I ended up enjoying it. So I ended up meeting Kurt Sayanga, who was at the time, I think, an art director or the art director or doing art direction for Discord Records, for Fugazi and them, and Steve Niles, who is super successful now. Is 28 Days Later and all his horror work. And he's got, I think, Black Mask is the company that he publishes through now. And he's still, Dark Horse reprints some of his older work I just saw online somewhere. And at the time, Steve was in Gray Matter, the band, who was on Discord. And him and Kurt were doing a fanzine called Greed. It was like a prozine. It was solid, good-looking magazine size. And we struck up a conversation, because back in the day, everybody was coded. If you were wearing, if you had funny hair or were wearing lots of pins with bands on them, or, a Clash t-shirt or whatever, people would kind of gravitate to each other, if you know what I mean? Because not everybody had that, and you could kind of go, oh, that's, the same way that if you were wearing a comic book shirt and we're walking, in a comic store, going down the street, somebody would go, hey, Love and Rockets, or they'd go, hey, American Flag. Oh, Flaming Carrot, I've heard of that. You know what I mean? It was weird. Or Batman, even back then. It was a signifier that you were of the tribe. And we got to talking because, it was like, hey, we were talking about music and shit and comics. And they said, they liked the drawings that I was doing. This is not a short answer. They liked the drawings of Milk and Cheese I was doing and thought they were funny. And Kurt or both said, if you do a comic with them, we'll print it in Greed if you send it to us. And I'm like, huh, comic. So I had, let me think of this as a comic. And I did a really ugly, terrible 2-page comic, and they ran it. And as ugly and awful as it was, people liked it. A lot of people liked it. It was crude and dumb and simple. The drawing was purposely not good. I wanted it to look crude, and the characters were awful looking, but people liked the jokes. That's what I was saying about personality coming through, is that people can draw better than you, they can write better than you, but maybe you're funnier or more interesting, or something catches someone's ear, eye. Who knows? You know what I mean? Because it was certainly not, the drawing was, it made people laugh despite being crappy looking. Maybe crappy looking is what made it funny. Something like Steven at the time was really weirdly crazy drawn, and I loved it. So why would I? Because I had to knock myself. Other people can do it, but I can't. So anyway, it ran in Greed, and then this was a pattern at the time. Greed goes under. Something really shitty happened with the people backing it, and Greed goes down. And I was like, I was going to get to do a Milk and Cheese strip in Greed again and again. So I get a call from somebody, would you do, I like Milk and Cheese, would you do some Milk and Cheese strips for this book called Asylum? Okay, the money was garbage, but I mean, okay, shit, yeah. I want to get into comics. This is what, 87, 88? I did about 4 or 5 pages for Asylum. Asylum goes under before it even publishes, I think, a first issue. Kyle Baker was doing something for that. I ended up, and then I'm getting asked to do, I got asked to do it for something else that went under. By the time it's 1991, I've got 10 pages of Milk and Cheese. And I'm with SLG at that point. And the way that that happened was my second convention, let's make this as quick as possible. My first San Diego, I was tabling next to SLG, next to slave labor. And I didn't really talk to the guys much, to Dan and Scott and everything, because I was afraid of everybody at the goddamn convention. I knew some of their publications, and so I'm like, I had one comic out. I was literally one comic, and it came out at the convention, and I hated Pirate Corps 1, and I was so devastated about how crappy my work looked that I was just, anyway, that's a whole other interview. So they were annoyed at me because I was like acting up at the table because I didn't know what to do. I had a lot of nervous energy. I was really scared and really nervous, and I had a wind-up monkey, and I had a bell that I was doing $10 sketches. You know, it was just awful. But I was having, I mean, it was fun, but I was sitting next to me must have been a pain in the ass because I was talking like this, but obnoxious, because it was my, you know, defense mechanism, doing obnoxious comedy and shit like that. And Dan wanted to take the monkey and burn it, apparently. The next year I end up near them at the convention, but we end up talking, and, you know, first impression aside, we end up hanging out. And I had no publisher. My book was canceled. And I end up at a party, and I don't remember what party it was, but boy, was I stinking drunk. And Dan was stinking drunk. And Scott Savidra was drunk. Everybody was drunk. It's like 5 a.m. I'm on the floor, literally on my back on the floor. Dan is on his back on the floor. And Scott kind of pushes us towards talking about doing Pirate Corps, which was canceled by attorney, doing Pirate Corps for slave labor, for SLG. We've been kind of dancing around it. I was afraid to ask. And Dan and I have a drunk handshake agreement. Yes, okay. I wake up, terrible hangover, but I sober up and I go, oh my God, he was just being nice to me. He was just drunk. Dan doesn't want to, Vado doesn't want to publish my stuff. But he tracks me down because I avoided him, because that's my crazy personality. And we agree to do Pirate Corps. So 88, 89, 90, I'm doing Pirate Corps. In 90, 91 or so, and I go, Dan, I have all these milk and cheese strips that nobody used. I don't know what to do with them. If I do a bunch more and fill out a book, would you publish it? And he just goes, yeah, why not? What the hell? I mean, that was like literally it. That's how loose things were. We didn't have a contract on milk and cheese. We got a contract on Pirate Corps, which rolled over into my other work. Pirate Corps did not make much money, a couple of $100, which means it was not really worth it for Dan. But we became very, very good friends. And I love the friendship that Dan and I had for so long. I love Scott. And I met so many people at SLG, and so many amazing people started off at SLG over the years. And I cherish the SLG years, but the last few years, things just did not work. Dan did not pay a page rate up front, did not pay an advance up front. That was from day one. But the back end was very nice. And Milk and Cheese made money. And then Dork in 93, real quick, the same exact thing happened. We were doing a thing called Instant Piano, me, Kyle Baker, Mark Badger, Stephen DiStefano, and Robbie Bush. And it fell apart. They all moved to California. Things didn't get done. Kyle brought a lawyer in, which was fucking fakakta. Anyway, it didn't get done. So I had 10 more pages of comics sitting there. And I went, Dan, if I got 10 pages and plus, and I'll put in some of the stuff that I did for some anthologies. Can I do it? I'll do it. Something. I want to call it Dork. He goes, sure. Why the hell not? Milk and Cheese was doing. We had kept reprinting the first one. Dork made money. Dork went up in sales with every issue while it was going. But at a certain point, I ran out of material that I could use to ballast those books. Again, not a short answer. I'm doing my best. But I had all these pages to start it with, so it was easy to start. And then I kept continuing to have pages because I had pages from all the anthologies. Milk and Cheese strips that people were paying for me to do here, there. And then I'd round it out with new material. Dork material, the Epic Light Murder Family, I reprinted in issue 2 or whatever. I reprinted stuff from Reflex Magazine that Kyle and I did. We were paid peanuts for most of this stuff, but I was able to roll it into a new comic that made me money. And then when the comics came out, people saw them, and that's how I got into Finnish heavy metal fanzines, and I got into the Onion and other places, so I would start getting paid again. And then Deadline reran stuff when I couldn't do new stuff. It was a very bizarre career that not many people could have done it that way, which is why I can't tell people this is how you get into comics, even when pre-digital. I just had a very weird thing where it was constantly $20 here for, it was like I was syndicated amongst fanzines and things like that. And then I would do work for fanzines that I would then put in Milk and Cheese. It was so weird. This ran out. By the time I was doing Milk and Cheese 7 and Dork like 10, the anthologies were dying out. Free weeklies were running out. I was not getting those 1 to 4 pages anywhere. So I had to do almost everything new. So with nothing up front, that meant that I was not making money while I was working on the book. And I had to wait months to get any money that was coming in. And sales were dying on Dork. Milk and Cheese has always sold okay for what it is. The paperback has been the Dark Horse complete versions are still selling. It's amazing to me, to be honest. 34 years later, and there's still people buying Milk and Cheese things. And I'm doing some collaborations with them, with some people for stuff. It was a great time, and it was a perfect time for the kind of comics that I did. And what happened was I couldn't do them anymore, but I stayed. I wanted to finish Eltonville up at SLG so we could collect it into a book. And because I wasn't getting more material out, we couldn't do more trade paperbacks. So it was a reverse spiral. And finally, I realized that I could not go forward with Dan. And it was not a way that I could keep doing books in like 2003, 2005. And I didn't, if you look at my output, there's no books for me. There's no issues out. And finally, I finally called up Dan and told him that I had to leave. And it was horrible. I broke down crying. It was like telling my father, I was like, I have to move on. I can't be in the family business anymore. I gotta, do my own thing with someone else. And it was with Dark Horse. I was going to Dark Horse, and he always disliked Dark Horse because Dark Horse and Vertigo and a few companies would definitely go after some of the people he was working with. I mean, he had legit beefs with them. He had some that I think that he was just pissed off at them and stuff. He didn't like that I did a lunchbox with Dark Horse. That lunchbox made me more money than 3 issues of a comic. Anyway, so yeah, it was amazing while it lasted. Dan did not take my leaving well at all. I have not spoken to Dan since. By his, it was not I still wanted to maybe do something when I could and still come on the podcast that he did. It wasn't called a podcast at the time, and still be, I loved Dan. And then that was tough. But you do have to move on. I don't like change. Same way that the industry is difficult to move through. I felt safe there, and I felt like wanted there. I was like, I went from like one of the best-selling comics there to like the 3rd or 4th best. That was fine though. Milk and Cheese kept. I mean, he was public about this. Milk and Cheese helped SLG keep going, along with other things, until Johnny, the homicidal maniac, really blew the doors out, and Lenore kicked the windows out, and Milk and Cheese was like 3rd, 4th, or whatever the hell. But I knew that, you know what I mean. I felt like it was indie wrestling. I was a big fish in a small pond, and now I'm I don't know, medium-sized to small fish in a very large pond. It still turned out to be better. Having a library at Dark Horse has helped a lot. I've been working for Dark Horse almost every year since 1991 in some capacity or another as a freelancer, though. Dark Horse was SLG was my home. Dark Horse was like, my hangout pad, my crash pad. I've been working I went full-time in 91 because of Predator, Bill and Ted, and Milk and Cheese #1. And after that, I had always had a good relationship with Dark Horse through different editors that I worked with. I've done work for hire and creator-owned. A lot of Milk and Cheese strips started there. The first Eltonville strip was at Dark Horse in Instant Piano when that finally got back on the table. I did The Mask. I did a lot of anthology work. We did a couple of lunch boxes. We did, so I always had that relationship. And Beasts of Burden happened by accident as an 8-page thing. And my relationship with Dark Horse took on a new impetus as I was working on those stories for those horror books, and then became its own series. So from 2003, for a couple of years, I realized that I was leaning towards going to Dark Horse full time and taking my books there. And they put out the Milk and Cheese collection, and it did very, very well. I went through, I think, 3 printings in hardcover. The production was nicer than what SLG could do. They had more money to put into it. It's just a matter of fact. I needed to move on. I'm not doing anything for Dark Horse right now because the way that things are working out, I need to move on, or at least take a break. I'd like to continue working with Dark Horse, but I don't know if Dark Horse can continue to work with me on Blackwood. So I'm gonna have to figure something out there if we want to keep that going. And right now, Beasts is not doing as well as it used to. That's a fact. It's still got a good audience, but it's not making a ton of money. At this point, I don't even know if it's profitable at this point. They want to keep it going, but I just don't know if I can do it because there's changes and new realities in publishing. So I'm taking a break right now. So it's weird. It's weird to look back at a 30-year career or be asked about a 30-year career. And even if it's not a motor mouth like me to encapsulate the memories that come back, because everything's intertwined. It's not like I was a big enough hit that I could just work when I wanted to, or get an agent and call the shots. Have the whip hand on the publishers instead of the other way around. I'm a side dish. I think I'm a really good side dish. I think I'm a really good cartoonist and I'm a good writer. But the realities are, the books have to be profitable to keep going. And Dork did not make its money back, and Eltonville did not make its money back because they paid for 2 issues of it. And that's tough to go from Dork doing well and Milk and Cheese also doing well as a book, and then finally going to have Eltonville finished and completed, and it was like 7 years too late. And Dork also said, I think Dork's my best book, maybe. I think Eltonville's a decent achievement. I think Dork is a really good book with some really good work. It's a journey of a cartoonist. It's watching me, go from amateur hour to a professional cartoonist to whatever I am, to whatever you consider Evan Dorkin to be. It's my diary, in a way. I love Milk and Cheese, but Milk and Cheese is Milk and Cheese. It's but there's no story. That's why it was always funny when somebody would call up to try to make it a TV show or a movie, believe it or not. I have a file of some of that shit. I would always try to get it in writing because it blew my fucking mind. Milk and Cheese lives next door to Chris Farley and he's their neighbor and they have it's a story about 2 people who bazooka whoever, it's a 1 minute TV show. Now you could do it. Back then you could, because you could do a minute and stream it. So yeah, that's my career. I think you got my whole career tonight.
Why do you think?
And I got to work with DC Marvel. Connected with people.
Let me just ask one question about Milk and Cheese.
Yeah. Oh no. It's my hit single.
Why do you think people connected to it as much as they have, and why do you think those 2 characters have had such longevity?
It was 3 things. 1, the characters made people laugh. I can't even necessarily explain it. Do you know what I mean? I can't show you the first few strips and go, look, here's where this joke paid off. It's just stupid. It just was right for the times. It was a kind of punk rock strip for a lot of people. It was a very cynical, negative, angry, goofball, pop culture filled, what the fuck kind of thing, you know? In some ways, though, it was also very mainstream because, I mean, it was these two dumb characters just smacking people. It didn't have a lot of curse words at first. They got mouthier, and the violence wasn't as horrible as it became later on, in some ways. But those initial strips just looked like something you might see in a college paper, in a free weekly that wasn't as classy as The Stranger or The Voice. You know, it was just some jerky drawings that, you know, back of the high school notebook dumbass drawings that just rang with people. Like I said, I didn't even think of making a comic out of them. They just were like two dumb wrestlers who came out and said dumb shit and hurt people. Now, I don't know if that, I don't like, I'm always, I don't know how to describe them because people go, what's it about? It's about two alcoholic dairy products that smack people around and they tell jokes. That's it. It's the same fucking thing over and over. It's just you spin the wheel and change the attack a little bit. It's like the Ramones, you know? It's more or less the same approach to the songs, just, you know, some different beats, some different guitar. And sometimes they're buried in a cemetery, and sometimes they're on Rockaway Beach, and you can name that Ramones song in 500 notes, that type of thing. So it clicked. The other two things are, one, it was a fantastic time. I was thinking about this recently, apropos of nothing. It was a fantastic time for character creation. Comics these days, the ones that are published, not maybe the ones on the web, which I'm less familiar with, but if you think about it, the 80s to the 90s was a fantastic time for independent creators to come up with singular characters, not concepts. A lot of the stuff that's coming out now from creator owned and whatnot is conceptual to be made into a television show, or conceptual because it's just conceptual. So you get, it's about a school, it's about a paranormal group, it's about X, Y, you know what I'm saying? A lot of comics coming out these days, it's about a zombie apocalypse. It's not about one character. And back then, the zeitgeist was you had a Buddy Bradley, Flaming Carrot, Reed Fleming, Sam and Max, Milk and Cheese, the Elfingville Club, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. I could keep going. I mean, I'd have to think with my old brain. But there was a lot of almost like classic entertainers or movie or silent film comedy or comedy characters coming out. And you had Hellboy and things, and the Madman. If you were into the costumes, you had Grendel. There was a lot of characters coming out, and the books revolved around those characters. Or the jokes: Too Much Coffee Man, Cynical Man. I mean, Julie Doucet's autobiographical character, Bitchy Bitch. There was a lot of things came out, and it's, the name of the character was the name of the book, and that died out when humor books and anthologies died out, and you don't see as many characters generated like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles even. I mean, think about how many character-related books came out in the wake of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and some are still going. Bone is a character and a concept. Usagi Yojimbo still going. And a lot of these are character-based. I don't know how far this point can go, but a number of those characters are still in play to one degree or another. They're either cult characters, or they're successful, or they're somewhere in between. And that just doesn't happen as much anymore, where people just go, here's my character. A lot of it now is, here is my world. Here is the world of Saga. Here is, a character might be involved, but it seems to be a conceptual world, if you know what I'm saying, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think of modern characters, and I'm like, there's the Goon, and the Goon's been around a long time and comes out of the tradition of the older characters, but it really does seem like people are coming up with more sagas and Walking Deads and things like that than they are comedy characters or superhero, or singular characters, singular genre characters, stand-up comedian type characters, or slapstick characters, or autobio characters that stand in for them or like them, their mouthpiece. One character that can go on a pin or a t-shirt in the old punk rock style. Now everything is a world. I'm not saying this is better. I'm just saying that the character creation is not as strong as the extended world, extended series creation. The one-shot, boiled down nature of characters like Sam and Max, Flaming Carrot, Reed Fleming, Milk and Cheese, etc., where you could probably read one story and get everything you know. That's probably still out on the web, and that might be out in other particular projects, but you're not really seeing that in comic shops or in it's not the zeitgeist right now. To make basically your comic book version of Bugs Bunny or Fritz the Cat or name the, you know what I mean, Abbott and Costello or whatever the fuck, and the third thing is Milk and Cheese. I got a letter once. This is how I'll describe it because I'm not good at doing it myself. So let me say what somebody else said. I got a letter from Comedy Central back in the day. And it was from somebody that I got a letter from somebody who was in development and somebody who had a job, a producer at Comedy Central. And they said, "Hi, I just read the Milk and Cheese book. I would like to talk to you about maybe doing something with these characters on Comedy Central as a show or as an animator or something. I think Milk and Cheese are stars." And I thought, I didn't want to, I ended up working for them for a week as part of a program. So it turned out good because I made money and I got to see what some TV is like getting made and how weird stand-up comedians are. But because I had to go into the offices and work with a bunch of stand-up comedians, and I got to see what it's like a little bit to work in a writer's room where nobody gave a shit about what you were writing and they didn't really want you there. So that was fascinating to me, and again made me want to go home and just do comics where I didn't have to be told yes or no. But the fact he said Milk and Cheese are stars, and I agree with him in a certain way, despite my I'm not saying I'm a star, and Milk and Cheese are specifically, they're just iconic characters, if you don't like them or do like them, they are strong, singular characters, like those other characters that I talked about. And there's a reason that there was a Flaming Carrot option, and a Buddy Bradley hate show is being developed at MTV. Reed Fleming, they tried to develop that into a movie multiple times. I think they're just getting a Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers movie, or something like that. I mean, a lot of these characters clicked with a lot of people, and they were big cult characters for a while. They were punk rock bands, pre-Hot Topic. They were never huge, but they were known and they were influential on a lot of other people. They didn't make people a ton of money, but they got around through the zines and through the mentions and the reviews. Just from Maximum Rock and Roll and Fact Sheet 5, people were finding out about these characters. And they were the punk rock versions of Love and Rockets. They were the punk rock versions. They were the versions of bands, just the iconic character and their creator, who there was some jokes, violence, craziness, comment on the times. It's a touch of underground comics, a touch of mainstream comics, a touch of show business. And they work for people. And now I think also Milk and Cheese became better drawn and became cuter. And I started drawing them in cute versions because I got bored. And I was reading a lot of manga, and I was like, why don't I just draw them with stick figure arms and legs in this panel? Or why don't I just draw them with big eyes? Because I didn't want to draw the eyebrows all the time. And so they became kind of, different versions of them, and that people also liked. And the catchphrases worked for a lot of people. Jid makes a man mean, which a friend of mine said when he was drunk. Somebody bumped into him. Everybody boos up and riot, which nobody ever said, unless they read Milk and Cheese. And dumb shit. Merv Griffin. Why was Merv Griffin funny? I don't know. It was just them yelling Merv Griffin. Some people hate them, that strip, and they hated my work, but enough people liked it. And somewhere in there is the truth. You know, I'm still drawing them. I mean, oh, shit, what the fuck is this? I got a cat version of them. And it's not to make a lot of money. It's because I have a cat now, and people, we were doing buttons and stuff. And I was just like, what do I do with milk and cheese? I'll draw them as cats and put eye patches on them to make people on my Instagram laugh. You know, it's not calculated. Milk and cheese was not calculated. Beasts of Burden, Eltingville, they were all just jokes, you know, or ideas. Nothing I did was calculated. Now I have to be calculated because I got to make up for the career that I didn't plan. If nothing else from the interview, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. You know, I have to be careerist now for the first time in my life at a time when it's the hardest possible point for me to be careerist because I'm not new. I don't have an interesting story as a person or a creator. I don't have anything really new to offer except ideas and stories. I'm not hooked up with any group. I don't have a background in superhero comics. I don't have a background in, I'm not an 8-bit guy. I'm not a music guy. I'm not a video game person, even though I play them, but I don't have, you know, I don't have, I have outdated joke material. Milk and cheese and all that stuff doesn't seem to work. I don't know if young people work. I guess they do. I mean, but I meet them at conventions, but I don't have the pull that I used to have because that was the 90s. And it was part of a trend, and trends die out. And I am lucky that people still like milk and cheese enough that the book keeps going, that people are still asking me to do things with the characters in collaboration with them. I've got 4 things I'm working on right now. That's actually like a record for me. And it's 2011, 2021. Holy shit, old man brain. So that's really cool, you know? But there's a lot of competition right now, and I'm not good at going, hey, do you have work for me? I'm not good at doing that. I never have been. And it's something that I have to, now I'm going to my fans and saying, hey, do you have, I know I've been talking for hours. You have food? Quiet, cat. And, but now I'm going to my fans, and basically they're my customers and the people I have to please, like a publisher or an editor, all in one. You know, if I bomb out on the Patreon, I've got to find another way to do this. Luckily, the Patreon's going up instead of down, and the merchandise that we've been able to. I mean, we could never make shirts. We would never have had the money to make T-shirts and to make cloisonne, to make pins that we did and things like that until the technology got to the point where you could make print on demand and you can get a good enough deal. I'm not going to say that it's the greatest fucking thing on earth because, you know, you hope people are getting paid who are making these pins, and you do the best you can when you middleman yourself with a company overseas. You know, the best you can do is when you hear of something that's really awful about something like that, you don't go with that company. You go with company that you hear better things about and see better things about. But who the fuck knows what's going on? But as far as the shirts go, it's all print on demand. I just bought this shirt. This is a Wired World shirt from Philip Bond from Deadline, which is a series that's never even been collected. But I badgered him to make a shirt and put it on TeePublic, and he did. And I bought it. I'm going to buy another one. And that's just, in large, that's the weird stuff that can happen right now. You know, we did the milk and cheese gin shirt up on TeePublic. Sarah, it's not something I knew about because I'm not good with computers and sites and stuff like that. And I couldn't put the shirt up myself because I can't color or prepare a file. But she does that stuff and for us, and she put it up, and we sold a ridiculous amount of shirts. You know, so if you're an older creator, that's one way you can possibly go, is to try to recapture the people who are out there who really like your stuff and always have, and get some new people involved too. And if you're a young creator, that's stuff to keep in mind because, I mean, any revenue stream. I mean, if you're making $100 from it, do it, as long as it's not making more work for you than it's worth. I work very hard on the Patreon. I do new comics for it. I show my process on covers and on art. I'm showing old work, scripts. I'm putting scripts up. I'm putting letters up from back in the day. I'm talking about horror stories, work that went bad because of me, work that went bad because of nothing or the industry, and putting prints up for people. That, it's work. It's not a handout. That's a problem that a lot of people have. They think that you're somehow getting like unemployment, but it's not. You're working for that. If you're not working for it, just like a comic book, people will drop you and stop supporting you. So it's in a lot of ways, it's my main job right now. But because it's removed from the industry, we don't know what people are doing on their Patreons or the Kickstarters that we don't see. Everything is so decentralized right now and compartmentalized that we have no idea who the young people are who are making web comics and Kickstarters and patrons who are turning over fantastic money with their audience. And you're not going to know who they are ever, even if they have a huge audience, because nobody's reporting on these people. They haven't broken into the direct market, which would be a step down for most of them. They haven't broken into previews. They're not getting written up on the comic book sites, and I don't even read the comic book sites anymore. So they're not on the radar of an old white dude making dopey comics for 30 years. That doesn't mean they're not in comics, and that doesn't mean that they're not kicking ass. Really, come on.
So let's jump ahead to your most recent work.
This is my cat.
Hello.
Look,
what's her name
cat.
or his name?
It's the Pirate Girl.
Pirate Girl.
Yeah. Well, she only has one eye, and I just thought of her as a pirate with the eye patch, but I'm not going to put an eye patch on her. And she is awesome, but we're still acclimating her to the house, and she's become her own little industry. People really like following the story because I was taking pictures of her outside and going, "Look at this cat I found." Sarah saw her first. So anyway, but that's the cat. So now, yeah, I'm putting cat pictures up on the internet. So like, how freaking ridiculously middle class goofy is that? Love you. I love you.
Speaking of cats and house pets, thank you for the segue. Let's talk about Beasts of Burden. Tell me a little bit about the concept.
Cats and dogs fighting the supernatural. It sounds as dumb as milk and cheese, but it's more or less my main project these days, even when it's not coming out. It started as an 8-page story that I was doing for the Dark Horse book of Hauntings. The editor, Scott Alley, had worked with me on some stuff. He knew that I liked horror stuff. He asked me for a story because, again, I don't approach people and pitch stories or series because I just didn't do that. It was Hauntings. It was ghosts. It was an anthology hardcover, and there was going to be a Hellboy story and a bunch of other people. P. Craig Russell's in there. I was like, ooh, that sounds, it's always good to be part of something like that. And it's always good to get paid to do something. And I couldn't come up with any ideas for a good haunted house story because I really like haunted house stuff as a trope, as a subgenre. But I got the idea for haunted dog house to do something different in case somebody did do a haunted house story. And I wasn't doing the second regular haunted house story. And there were 2 haunted house stories in there. I mean, they were different, but I didn't want to be the third. So I always try to do something different for an anthology. If everybody's going to do serious stories, I try to do a joke. If everybody's doing jokes, I try to do a serious story. Something to stand out and to try to not be, and also to give me a way to think about the story, to approach it, to narrow it down. So with Beasts of Burden, there was no Beasts of Burden at the time. We didn't have a title. We didn't have a series. I wrote it. I came up with the plot and I pitched it. And Scott liked it. And my cat's walking on everything. I had Jill Thompson in mind to draw it, to illustrate it. I was friends with Jill. I met her, I think, in '91 with Robbie Bush. We were driving back from a convention, got lost in a bad rainstorm, and he knew where her and her boyfriend at the time, Jay, lived, and they invited us to stay with them for a night. and she had 11. They had 11 cats or something like that, which is kind of funny that I think about it. And Jill was, and you know, we had been friends, and I love Jill's work. And so I asked her, Scott asked her to do it, and she said two conditions. I think the conditions were can't do more than 5 panels, and we had to have a pug as one of the dogs, which turned out to be really fortuitous for the book because pugs became one of the main characters, one of the best liked characters, and definitely the most fun one of the most fun characters to work on. And so we did this 8-page story about a haunted doghouse, and which I'm sure somebody's done before, if not 5, 10, 20 people in prose or something. And it ends, and it was just, that was it. It was about a haunted doghouse, a bunch of dogs. It was very influenced by what I was going for in my head was my memories of Watership Down, in the fact that the rabbits had this culture of their own, that had their own religion, their own way of thinking about things, etc. And that's what the wise dog, who is basically like the exorcist, shows up and does the poltergeist bit. And it's 8 pages, and it's sad at the end, but it's nice at the end, and it has a cute ending. And there's a cat, a bunch of dogs, and people really liked it. I mean, I'm not going to lie. People really liked it. At Dark Horse, people who read it really liked it. It got me a lot of attention. A lot of people talked about it. Jill and I were very, very happy with it. Stopgap. And they continued the book series, and Scott asked if we wanted to do another story together. And I said, if Jill and I wanted to contribute to the next one. And I said, can we do something with the dogs? And he said, sure. And so this was the book of witchcraft. So I did a witch story. I wrote a witch story. Jill and I did a witch story. And that was 12 pages, I think. And then it kept going, and we did a 16-pager for the book of monsters, of the Book of the Dead, which was the zombie dogs as a result of the first one. And then we were building a continuity. And the last one was the book of monsters, where we did our longest story, and I co-wrote that with Sarah, which was a werewolf story, which involved one of the characters who was going to be killed, who we didn't kill. Then it was popular enough that we started talking. We won an Eisner for one of the stories, and it was popular enough that Dark Horse, we all knew that we were edging towards, like, let's continue this. The anthology book stopped. So in like 2017, 2018, we started talking about a dedicated series. So had to come up with a name for it, because before then we had no name for it. It was just the names of the title of the stories. And Jill and I did a miniseries, and it didn't sell great as a comic. It sold fucking amazing as a book. I think we went into 7 printings. We had like 3 or 4 international editions. Then we had a Hellboy crossover, and then we just weren't getting issues out. So we never got a second collection out, and things deflated. And we've revived the book. We've got 2 more collections out. We've been working with Benjamin Dewey, who has done now 9 issues of the comic. And we got him out on a better schedule. The pandemic knocked the last series, Occupied Territory, which just wrapped up and just came out. It knocked it off schedule, but it was all written, and it was mostly drawn. So it's like we were not fooling around. We were getting books done. So our 4th collection will be out in November, and I've got 6 one-shots planned. And cat just destroyed something, and I want to keep telling these stories. Oh, cat, you son of a bitch! It's the book that I would like to work on until I die. It really is. If we could just keep that going, because I know the Wise Dog stories, when we start telling some of them, we've been opening up that Watership Down like world. And yeah, you see, it's a concept. It's not a character. We have a ton of characters, a lot of animals and dead things, and it's about a small town where these dogs have been, because of that haunted doghouse, they've kind of been introduced to the larger occult world. In the world, dogs and cats and animals see ghosts just like we kind of think they do, or the way that they get upset by, in folklore, dogs get worked up when like a witch is in town or coming by. So it plays off that, but they've become basically occult investigators, except that they're four legs. They can't talk to people unless the people are undead or afflicted by the occult or something, or are monsters. And it's just these. That's really what it is. It's just them being. People have compared it to like the journey home. I don't remember what that thing is. It's a thing about dogs running around and cats and stuff. Like Milo and Otis, that's the one I know. And Buffy, the Vampire Killer, or Supernatural, and things like that.
I mean, as a child of the 80s, what it really reminded me of is like Goonies or Monster Squad, where you have a group of friends who have to confront, some kind of evil menace that takes over their town.
Yes. I will agree with you, even though I'm not a Goonies fan. I did not see Monster Squad until only about a year ago. And I think I would have loved Monster Squad in the 80s if I saw it in the 80s, but I wanted I didn't like the kids in Monster Squad. They just don't connect. But we could talk about, I have a podcast with my friend for talking about horror movies and things like that. But definitely, you're right. I never even thought of that aspect of the animals being the kid gang. That is true.
Now, as somebody who grew up on Marvel Comics with the the different breeds of dog, was there a conscious attempt to have like, this is a Captain America kind of dog, this is a Thing kind of dog?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. Well, Pugs talks Thing like, for sure. He's the Brooklyn guy. Sure. I'm from Brooklyn. I talk a lot. I say dumb shit. So guess who Pugs sounds like? No, the first script didn't name the characters at first. And if I could go back, and if I knew that we were going to do a series, I would have not named the characters Ace, Rex, or Whitey. Now, Whitey, you can figure out why I wouldn't call him Whitey. I named him kids. I wanted purposely storybook, Middle America, Golden Book names for the animals. I want the first 8-page story was supposed to feel like a fable or a kid's book in a way, even though some bad things happened. The book has always been kind of a weird bait and switch that we didn't plan, and that the watercolor art that Jill does is so lush and beautiful and adorable that it's hard to remember that these beautiful, horrible animals sometimes get torn apart, like plague dogs or Watership Down. There's real animal fighting, and I never realized how much that might trigger people. So we've had people drop the series for sure. Not angry at the series, but angry, but not able to read about the animals in peril, animal death. There's one story in particular where it's very sad, and there's an animal abuser, a teenager, and it was written in my fear of anything happening to my then very young child, but it involves a lot of animal death. And while it isn't gory, there is one scene in particular that is very sad, based on a scene from Night of the Hunter, in fact. But it really, we risk that because it is a horror series. It's a fantasy series, it's a horror series, adventure series with a lot of humor. But the fact is, these animals are not really, like if the Goonies was a little more serious, or Monster Squad was a little more serious, or the Lost Boys, and some of those kids got what they would have gotten in real life. A couple of Corey Feldmans would fall onto spikes or get torn up by a monster, or a cute kid would die because a cute kid shouldn't be there. And that's one of the things that we found ourselves dealing with, because we didn't design this as a series. It kind of became one. And the rules set up in the earliest stories are the rules that we're working with as much as possible. So these animals are not anthropomorphic, and it's a cute book, but it's not a cutesy book, I hope. And if zombie dogs come out of the grave to attack them, you're going to see zombie dogs. You're not going to see dogs with some blood on them. We don't go for the gore all the time, but it's there. It's interesting that you said that, actually, now that I think about it, because the way we pitched it was, it's very much an 80s horror movie vibe. Same thing with Blackwood, which is like the people version of Beasts of Burden that I'm doing with fishes. I mean, that's very influenced by 80s movies. I mean, that was in the pitch. That was like Real Genius and God, now I'm not remembering. Fright Night, Return of the Living Dead, things like that. What I was going for, which we haven't really even achieved yet, but
There's also kind of an X-Men quality to it, and a little bit of a Buffy quality to it, to Blackwood. Where
I do love teen books growing up. My favorite comic was Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. But I loved I was a freak, and I was a kid when the Giant Size X-Men 1 came out, and I was an instant fan. And the X-Men was the book. Taking that into grade school. Me and my friends poured over that book. But I like the Champions. I love the Defenders when I love team books. The idea, I like team anything. I love the occult team, the superhero team. I mean, Beasts of Burden in some ways comes out of a comic that I never did, that I developed when I was 18, working on Pirate Corps. Late night sessions hanging out at diners with Brian and Tony from Eternity, who I'm still friends with. My first publishers, who are, some of my closest friends to this day. And it was a comic that that was like our love. I mean, I was riffing off our conversations about Kolchak the Night Stalker and the idea of an occult team that used guns. And I have a ton of notes about it. And basically, it's become Beasts of Burden and Blackwood. And the reason I never pitched it is because the BPRD and X-Files and all these, it's a large jump from 1986, 87, when I first started working on it, to X-Files and BPRD. But that's how long I went with no career and not putting together pitches. And it's something that I always wanted to do. Still kind of want to do it. But at this point, I felt like it got superseded. But now there's just and I'm not saying that I had the most original idea on earth. The guy who did Chris Carter, who did X-Files, was also influenced by Kolchak. Lots of us were influenced by Kolchak. Lots of people probably wanted to do their version of an occult team with superheroes, or an occult team of investigators who were, we've had Men in Black, and we've had X-Files and Buffy, and all these groups of people who have come together, who learn about the occult through some character who didn't know it or something like that. And sucks up all the folklore of the world, so that you're fighting things that people didn't know about years ago, like the Aswang and stuff like that. And I feel like I'm the 800th person to come to it after a certain point. So I never pitched it. And when I did pitch it, I decided not to do it because we ended up going with Call of Cthulhu. I don't know if you know that book that Sarah and I did with some other people, which Dark Horse collected. It was a digital comic that we were doing for Stela, and it had a tighter. Sarah came up with the character and the concept, and I just fell for it the minute she told me it. And on my way to my therapist, I had all this stuff worked out. And when I got home, we both talked, put our ideas together, and I love that. I would love to keep that going somehow, but there's a lot of books out there, and a lot of And that's all my love of like weird fiction and Cthulhu stuff. And Sarah did all this crazy research, and we were bringing in all these old pulp things and public domain characters. Now, this has been done a million times too, but we were doing it as sort of a Hong Kong, a version that was kind of like comic book mixed with the Hong Kong action movies that we fell in love with in the 80s. You know, watching the kung fu movies on TV in the 70s and 80s, and then living in New York and being able to start seeing John Woo movies and Jackie Chan movies in the theater, at the Music Palace, you know, falling upon Stephen Chow by accident, and just, you know, seeing King Hu movies and things like that, and just loving that kind of action, and kind of melding that with the pulp heroes. I mean, Doc Savage is a team of guys who go out and kick people's heads in, but it wasn't really a cult. But I like that pulp stuff a lot. The idea of the spider, or of a group of people fighting the occult, but using technology and weaponry, because, you know, back in the day, you really couldn't do much when you had a Dracula or a Wolfman or something. But now we have massive explosives that you could carry on person, and guns that could tear these things apart, so that you could at least you could tear the head off of a vampire and then separate. You don't need to go in there with a stake and that's hackneyed at this point. But that was the area that I wanted to work. You know, this worldwide conspiracy group that was working in secret to keep monsters and the undead, but I was also mixing it in with mobs and conspiracy theories and pyramid schemes and cults. So what? So was everybody else. I just didn't have the balls to do it back in the day. Who knows? I might have had a hit on my hands. I might have had a 3-issue, never remembered. So many things fail by issue 2. So, but anyway, that's kind of what Beasts of Burden and Blackwood. I realized in the middle of Beasts of Burden, I'm doing Beasts of Burden. I said to Brian, I'm doing the name of the book, and he was like, "Yeah, you kind of are. It's just that they're dogs and cats living together, and they've been conscripted." Like one of the characters in the series, they've been conscripted, and there are all of them are our way into learning about the occult through the group that they're fighting. So, yeah, Beasts of Burden in a very, very large nutshell. It's not what we planned. I never expected to do a talking animals book, but you know, I'm glad I'm doing it. I really love it. And I'm hoping that it can continue, that we can keep going on that, because I just want to tell that story and wrap it up, and then keep telling stories about the wise dogs, which are basically the wise dogs are, for lack of a better way of putting it, the exorcists slash Ghostbusters slash scanners, or whatever, you know, in 80s terms. They're the experts at this, who have a long tradition that goes back to, like, you know, D&D type fantasy stuff, where war dogs back in the day, when they would armor mastiffs up to fight in battle, but basically, if they were, let's say they were, you know, Merlins and wizard shit and stuff, they were not only training these mastiffs to fight, but some of them were being trained to become wise dogs, which are, you know, have some power, you know, some fuzzy fucking logic about how that happened. But we've actually gone into some of that stuff in some of the short stories in flashback and things like that. And some of the stories that we're telling now kind of show it's kind of very BPRD, you know, what were the wise dogs doing in 1947 in occupied Japan on a case, that kind of thing. So we can go throughout history with some of the characters, but it concentrates mostly on what's going on in this town, Burden Hill, where these characters have been deputized to watch over something that's going on there that they can't identify and defeat. But it's, you know, the usual reason, why is so much supernatural shit going on in our town, and the humans don't know about it, and the dogs are trying to do something about it, and because they're loyal, things don't always go right. because they're so hard, more heart than head for some of them. But we did not design them as a team to fight, because we only designed them as, the way that I wrote that first story was, we're going to need instant identifiers for these dogs, because they don't wear costumes, they don't wear clothes. So we're going to need one of each type. I mean, it's very cliched, and we're naming them blunt things. Like, I wouldn't name them Ace or Rex, because Ace is the Bat Hound and Rex is the Wonder Dog, who was in serials, who DC printed comics about. I didn't even think of that at the time. They were not named after the comics. They were named after super blunt, what do kids name dogs in golden books, if you know what I'm saying. So it's Pugs, Rex, Ace, Whitey, Jack, and the cat named the Orphan, because the cat has no home and the cat gets called the Orphan. And the Wise Dog's just called the Wise Dog. We didn't have a name for him either. He was like just a Gandalf type. We make him a sheepdog because that looks like a Gandalf type, right? And I described the animals in the pitch as like the scared dog, the angry dog, the stalwart dog. That was what Ace was called. The haunted dog, and that was it. The naive dog, and I described them that way because of the movie The Women. In the movie The Women, they described all the characters in the credits as animals. So they'd show a lamb for the character that was like the meekest. That just came, that was just how I described them to get through that part of the script. And we eventually had to start making stuff up and naming everything and coming up with reasons for everything and ignoring one or two things that were in the first story. But so yeah, looking back on it, I would have designed the team differently. I would not have had Whitey there. He wouldn't have had that name, and he wouldn't have had. I mean, Whitey's gonna die, right? I mean, he's got no powers. He's tiny, and he's not very bright. I mean, he should go home, right? I mean, he should go home before something happens to him. But that's not how comics works. Or I'm trying, very sad what's going to happen to him. Anyway.